Hi everyone. In this video, I want to talk about cross-tenant synchronization, a new capability in Azure Active Directory. And we often think about, well, we have multiple Azure AD tenants in some scenario. I've got two tenants right here. And I might think about, well, in this particular tenant, there are a bunch of SaaS applications, could be Azure services, could be third party. And they've been configured and they're trusting this particular tenant. So this is the IDP that's been configured for certain instances of these SaaS applications. And what I want is, hey, people in this Azure AD tenant, I want them to be able to be granted roles or particular application assignments, maybe members of groups, so that we can collaborate and we can use those. Now we can do this today. We have B2B, business to business. So I could, from this tenant, invite people from this tenant, and they would be external identities. And then I can add them to groups, I can assign them roles. At a more enterprise level, I can use entitlement management. So entitlement management and then access packages, I can create SharePoint access, group memberships, and then even pre-approve certain domains so they could go and request, hey, I want to have this particular access package. I can have certain approval flows. I have a lot of control over that. But imagine the scenario where what's actually happened is these are the same organization. I could think there's been some acquisition. So for example, maybe this is Saviltech.net, and I have acquired onboard to Azure.com. And my goal now is I want everyone, or at least a very large portion of the people in this separate Azure AD tenant, and they're going to be a separate Azure AD tenant for a while because of the complexities of moving them around and merging, but I want them to just be added as guests automatically to my tenant. And the reason we really think about it is within the same organization is there's certain privacy things that's happening here. It's going to be a push model. I'm going to have certain configurations that are going to say, hey, yes, I can define rules to push my accounts into the other tenant. So Microsoft and LinkedIn. Hey, this could be Microsoft. They have a bunch of SaaS applications, HR systems, whatever that might be. And then they just want everyone in the LinkedIn tenant to automatically have an external identity over here so they can work seamlessly together. If it is separate orgs, cross-organization, this would not be recommended what we're going to talk about. You would still use entitlement management. That would be the right way to achieve that. So my goal now is maybe for certain groups of users, maybe for everyone, as these accounts get created, as they get updated, hey, the department changes, some attribute changes, to automatically synchronize and update an account over here as well. So that's what we're really going to focus on. And I don't want them to have to do a redemption. I don't want them to have to click, yes, I want to do this. Yes, I'm having these. It's just completely seamless. That's what we're going to do. So what we're going to walk through is this scenario. So I can think about here that Saviltech.net in a lot of ways is going to be, it's got the resources. It has the SaaS applications that trust it. And then onboard to Azure, well, this has got some accounts that I want to ultimately be able to be assigned to resources over here. In the old Active Directory, we have those trust relationships. This is not a trust relationship, to be very clear. It's probably as close as we're going to get, but there is not actually an ability to, in here, go and peek and look at things in here. This is still a push model where I'm going to push my accounts to become guests in this tenant. So that's what we're going to actually walk through and show. Now, I talked previously, there's a link up there, about cross-tenant access settings. And we have to do that first. So that's going to be a key part of all of this configuration. So on both sides, we're going to define cross-tenant access settings. And if you remember, there's both an inbound and an outbound. But what I'm going to have to do on both sides is add the other tenant as part of its configuration. So on the onboard to Azure.com side, I'm going to add cross-tenant access settings for saviltech.net. And then on the saviltech.net side, well, I have to add cross-tenant access settings for, you guessed it, onboard to Azure.com. And obviously on this side, this is going to be getting the accounts pushed to it. So this is going to be all about inbound access. And on this side, well, it's outbound. We're pushing the account. So this would be outbound access. And there's just a couple of checkboxes we have to check. So let's actually go and look at these to walk through. So I start off, I'm in the saviltech.net tenant, and I have to set some configuration. So I go to external identities, cross-tenant access settings, and you can see I've added onboard to Azure. And for this point, I'm concerned about the inbound access. So I go to configured, and actually there's two flags I set on the inbound. So I have to go to trust settings, and I have to say, suppress consent prompts for users from the other tenant. And then on the cross-tenant access sync tab, I have to say, allow users to sync into this tenant. And that is the only configuration I'm going to do on this side. So if we think back, so on this inbound access, there's two things I have to do. On the trust, I have to say, yes, suppress the consent prompt. And I would say, okay, yep, we're ticking that box. And then on the cross-tenant access sync tab, so on the cross-tenant sync, I'm saying, yes, allow basically sync into this tenant. So I'm setting two options. And remember, this is not generic. This is only for onboard to Azure.com. So it's only coming from the onboard to Azure.com tenant. That's my configuration. Everything else we're going to do is now going to be on onboard to Azure.com, because remember, it's a push. The flow is here. All I have to say is saviltech.net, I want you to allow from onboard to Azure.com, hey, suppress the consents and allow sync into the tenant. All of the other configuration we're going to do is going to be on onboard to Azure.com. So let's continue that flow. So now on onboard to Azure.com, if we jump over to the other tenant, well, firstly, I have to configure the trust setting. So over here, I go to, once again, external identities, cross-tenant access settings. I've added saviltech.net, and this time it's my outbound access, and I've configured it, and all I'm checking is trust settings, suppress consent. That's the key part that's going to allow me to do everything else. So remember, on the outbound, I'm now just going into trust, and I'm setting that same suppress consent. I have to have done this before I try and do anything else. These three checkboxes are going to drive everything else we do, because now we can actually go and configure the cross-tenant synchronization. So this we can see in the screen. So if we jump back over, let's go over here. I can now come out of this screen, and under the main Azure AD, we scroll down, we see cross-tenant synchronization. And there are a number of steps to this. So I go into cross-tenant synchronization, I go into configurations, I would say new configuration. I've already configured it over here. So we'll just walk through. And it would be it will walk me through this, but under provisioning, I would set the mode to automatic. And although it's asking for admin credentials, it's really not doing that. All I have to do is put in the tenant ID of the tenant I want to push my accounts to. So in this case, this will be the tenant ID of saviltech.net. So I'm pushing from onboardtoazure.com to saviltech.net. So I would put in the tenant ID of saviltech.net and hit test connection. And notice it passed. So, okay, great. It is not checking any permissions of any kind. I, as the admin in onboardtoazure.com, don't require any permissions in saviltech.net. When I'm doing this configuration, so now let's jump over to carry this on. So what I'm now doing, I'm not in cross-tenant access sync anymore. I'm coming out of those sets of configurations. And again, it's only on this time. So now I'm doing cross-tenant synchronization. And I'm going into here and I'm saying, hey, I need to add a new configuration. I say, hey, provisioning. I want it to be automatic. And then I put in the tenant ID and I say test. What test is doing, it's looking at that, and that. As long as all three of these are ticked, hey, it's ticked on my side for the outbound, it's ticked on the target for the inbound, suppress consent, and allow sync into this tenant. It's those three things. If those three are checked, the test passes. It is not doing any check on, hey, do I, as the person running this, have permissions on this tenant? Doesn't care at all. I just have to have these boxes checked. Once that passes, I can then carry on with the flow. And the first thing I'm going to do is configure mappings. Because if we think about, well, I have attributes of the objects on this side. I may not want them to just go as they are. I may want to set certain things. So if we go and look at the mappings, what I can do here, so that passed, and then my next step is mappings. And what we're going to do is we're going to edit these. So I'm going to click the provision Azure Active Directory users just so we can really see and go through this. Notice it's enabled. And then I have this list of attribute mappings. Now I'm going to move this column over a little bit because it's showing me. This middle column is the name of the attribute on the target. So in my case, saviltech.net. And then this is the attribute from my source. So onboardtoazure.com. And I can modify these. Now a big one, notice by default, user type down here at the bottom. Normally a B2B would be a guest. But remember our scenario and where this is tailored towards. This is tailored towards, actually it's the same organization, they just have different tenants. So this is configured by default as a constant and it's going to be member. It's not guest, so it's actually going to set it as a member. And the other thing to look at is when do you apply this mapping? Some of them are only during the object creation. I actually changed it to always. And the reason I did this is because imagine some of these objects already exist in the other tenant. So if it already existed in the other tenant, if I have it configured to only set the value on initial creation, if it already existed, then it means it wouldn't apply that. In my case, even if it did exist as a guest, I wanted it to become a member. So what this will do is it will say, hey, I should always apply this mapping. I'll change it. So then it will actually go and, hey, if it already existed over here, it's going to update the attributes based on what I configure in these mappings. So because it's the same org, I don't want it to be a guest because it gets treated differently for some conditional access, some other types of access reviews. I want it to just be a member. It's part of the same organization. It's not some external guest from another company. So, hey, that mapping, that one's over there. And then if we carry on, so let's go back over here. So I can say, okay, that one's there. I also, for the display name, so if we go and see display name over here, I didn't actually want it to just say the regular display name. I want it to be obvious it was coming from the other tenant. So what I've done over here is I changed it from a direct or a constant to an expression. And I've changed it to just append to display name, so the attribute display name in my source, and I'm adding dash onboard to Azure. And there's a nice little expression builder that will help you create these expressions. And it even lets you go and select a username to say, hey, is it looking how I want it? So if I go and search for a user over here, let's say Oliver Dog, that's gonna be our test user today, and test expression, hey, it's gonna, display name would be Oliver Dog dash onboard to Azure, which is exactly what I want. So that expression builder can help me validate it's gonna look how I want it to look. And there are other attributes you might want to change. For example, maybe it's show an address list. So I've got it set to true. I want it to show in that address list. So I go and configure all of these various things. Hey, department. I've got that to always. So if I change the department, it will go and update it. It will carry this on. Now, something else I want to show in this screen here with the mappings is you'll also notice there's a source object scope. And I have it configured to all records. Now, when I finish off this configuration, I'm going to say, well, who do I want to sync? And I could sync groups, I could sync individual users, but maybe I've got all users, but I actually want some additional level of scoping. I want some additional granularity. So what this flag lets me do is I could, in addition to it checking, are you a member of these groups, for example, it will also now apply an additional filter. So it will apply both of these things. So maybe I might say, hey, it's all users, but only if the department equals some value that I add in here. So there's really two levels of filtering that I can leverage to make sure I only get the users that I really want. So we go through, we do all of this different attribute mapping to make sure, hey, it's going to send it exactly as we want. And we hit save. I don't think I changed anything, but we'll hit save anyway. And that's done. So we close that down. There are settings, and you probably want to do this. I haven't got it turned on, but hey, send a notification if a failure occurs. And also, hey, there's some accidental deletion threshold where I want to prevent if I pass some number, it's going to say, hey, hold on. Let's go and validate I really want to do this. So additional settings I can go and configure. So at this point, what have we done? We have done this mapping. Remember, as part of that mapping, what it also let us do was additional scope filters. Oh, I can't spell scope, very complicated word, early in the morning. So I also have scope filters. And it's going to be both of these applied, because the next thing I'm going to do is, well, yes, I could do individual users. More likely, you're going to have groups. Maybe it's all users, maybe it's FTEs, whatever that combination is. Then I'm going to specify which users and groups. And so the actual users that will get pushed is going to be, are they in this user or member of the groups you specify? And does it meet the scope filter if you've assigned those? So both of those things, those two kind of filters in a way, are going to apply to say if they're actually pushed. And then, hey, that creates my little external identity over here. So let's finish this off and see that part. So now I'm over here. Then it's users and groups. Now I've only added one user, just John. Let's add a second user. So I have, and let's actually show you. So on my other tenant, Saviltech, users, Oliver Dog, if I search for Oliver, Oliver is not here. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add. Now again, I could add a group, but I'm going to say, hey, let's sync Oliver the dog, assign. Now, this will then, within the sync interval, go and synchronize. Now that can actually take, if I go to overview, it will show me the details of the synchronization. So if I look at provisioning, my provisioning interval is every 40 minutes. So it could take some time. Also, if this is the first time you're actually setting this up, I need to go and hit the Start Provisioning button. I can also stop provisioning. I can restart provisioning. So restart provisioning will basically force it to go through and recheck all the attributes of all the users. Restart provisioning will automatically happen if I change the mapping. So notice it actually just ran. And it just ran because I clicked save on the edit mapping. So it had to go and check, well, did I change something? Does it need to go and resync some attributes? But I'll have to wait for Oliver Dog to show up. Now, maybe I get lucky and it just shows up, but no, I don't think that's very likely to happen. So what I can actually do here is I can provision on demand. I can force a certain synchronization. So I could select a group. So I'm going to say Oliver Dog. Let's provision you now. So if I've got some urgent need that can't wait up to that 40-minute cycle, I can just go and force the synchronization. And here it's showing me, okay, yep, it was successful. It's showing me the target attribute. So, hey, it should have created it as Oliver Dog on board to Azure. As job title, I think I have as a dog. It is a member. So at this point, it should have happened. So there's input user, determine if it's in scope. So it's checking, hey, should I be doing this user? Is it in something that maps? Is it meeting any scope I've defined? If so, hey, it should have done that. So now if I jump back over to Saviltech and refresh, there is Oliver Dog. And notice it's dash onboard to Azure. It has those attributes. So this will now just happen whenever I'm doing this. Now, something I probably should have pointed out, and most organizations, you're going to have this anyway. But to check some of these boxes, what I actually have to have is at least one, that the Azure AD has to be Azure AD P1 level, which just means I need at least one license of P1 in each of these tenants. Because without that P1 license, it won't let me check the box for the suppressed consent. It will be grayed out. So I need at least one Azure AD P1 in each tenant, which then enables me to set that flag. I think the licensing goal will be each user that you sync across should have a P1 license. I think that's the official licensing that's going to be the standard on that. That will get clarified over time. But that's what I'm going to have. And again, that last step was, let's make sure I do that right color. And I just do start provisioning. And that was it. And again, as I update those attributes within 40 minutes, which was that cycle, it'll show up. So it's going to basically keep them synchronized. Now, there are some nice little bits of information it shows me, provisioning logs, for example. So right here, if I go back to my configuration, well, it shows me the details, the last sync, the work it's doing. I get details about what's happening, but I can actually go and look at my provisioning logs and see exactly what's happened. So in this case, it's showing me the last 24 hours. I can go and click on one of these and it will show me, so created Oliver Dog, updated Oliver Dog. I can go and see all of the details so I can see exactly what happens on all of these. If I looked at 7 days, you'd actually see my account. So when it first went and did the updates for my guest in that other tenant. So it's got really good information about exactly what's going on. Now, this is not cross-cloud today. So when I think about these two tenants, this could not be commercial and gov. Today has to be in the same cloud. Another thing that comes up is with Teams. Would this avoid some of the cross-tenant switching you do in Teams today? No, it doesn't. But this is the solution. As you saw, it's very, very easy to set up. But again, from a privacy perspective, I probably would not use it cross-company. This is designed for, hey, I have multiple tenants within my company. I want seamless ability now for, hey, these people to be added as guests over here. And remember, once they're over here, I could have a dynamic group that just adds them into, along with all the other types of users. I could even set an attribute. Remember that mapping? I might set a certain attribute to show they're from this organization, and maybe I put them in some special groups over here as well. So all the regular Azure AD features still apply. I can still use all of those things if I want to do some special thing over here. There are the attribute directory extensions that I could validate and use as well if I wanted to have some sign that they come from over here and then do some mapping in a dynamic group on the other side. But that was it. Cross-tenant synchronization, get me users to show up very, very simply and current on the other tenant. As always, I hope that was useful. Until next video, take care.